Yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to our second edition of our marriage webinar series, Built to Last. Now, in the first edition, the topic we treated was making your marriage work, which is really a general topic. However, in this second edition, we'll be looking at two specific and very important topics in marriage, namely communication and conflict in marriage. Now, in this edition, my focus will be more on conflict and how communication affects it. Now, the reason is because both conflict resolution and communication are two very broad topics, and the time we have cannot cover everything. Now, because this is going to be an in-depth teaching, and I'm not exactly preaching, I'm going to go slowly. I would recommend that you take notes, and like our moderator has said, please, you can send your questions if there's something I said that you need more clarification on. So I'm going to go immediately to start the topic, and we will start with conflict in marriage. Praise God. Now, the first thing I want to say is what is conflict? And I think we should start off by defining what conflict is in marriage. It kind of lays the foundation for the things we're going to talk about. Now, conflict in marriage is actually a hostile disagreement between a husband and wife resulting from incompatible or opposing viewpoints, desires, interests, ideas, opinions, or expectations. Now, it shouldn't be confused with disagreements. It is possible to have a disagreement with your spouse without hostility. However, most, if not all, conflicts involve some degree of hostility. Now, the thing to note is this: conflict is normal and inevitable because marriage brings together two unique individuals, each with different personalities, temperaments, backgrounds, and expectations, who must now learn to live together as one. Now, we know, for example, that opposites attract. And so quite often, the two people that get married are not exactly alike in many ways. Now, it's also interesting that the things that attract us towards our spouse have a flip side, and that flip side often causes conflict. So, for example, a man may be attracted to a quiet lady and likes her gentleness. Now, that quietness can end up being a source of conflict when they get married and he starts complaining, "You are too quiet, you don't talk, I'm bored, you don't have vibes, you are this," and it can lead to a hostile disagreement. Therefore, the key to building a successful marriage is not to avoid conflicts, but to learn to handle them in ways that strengthen the relationship instead of weakening it. Now, when managed well, conflicts can actually strengthen intimacy in marriage by helping married couples understand each other better, But when it is handled poorly, it can gradually destroy intimacy in marriage. Now, I need to make this point that God didn't design marriage to be a battlefield, but He designed it to be a covenant of love. As such, the goal of conflict resolution in marriage is not about winning an argument. It's not about being right, but understanding each other and winning your spouse's heart back into unity and into intimacy. Now, let's just quickly touch on sources of conflict. And I'll not go into too much explanation here because it's not the focus. But it's important to mention different things, or rather a few things that cause conflict. Now, the first one, and it's quite high up in the list, is money. Money has been known to cause a lot of conflict in marriage. Sometimes having too much money can cause conflict. Having too little money can cause conflict. Then secondly, our different money languages or money patterns can cause conflict. I mean, a spender can get married to a saver, and that's already a recipe for conflict. And then the other aspect of money and why it causes conflict is that it triggers men and women's three most, should I say, deepest fears. For the men, money triggers the three core fears, which are a fear of losing respect, a fear of helplessness, and a fear of being controlled. For the woman, it triggers the fear of not being valued or appreciated, a fear of disconnection, and a fear of a loss of love. Now, when money causes disagreements, it triggers this fear. It is those fears that make the conflict or disagreement hostile. Because when we're afraid, it triggers the fight or the flight response in us. Most men, for example, when they don't have enough money, are afraid of losing the respect of their wives, or they are afraid of being controlled by their wives. So initially they start to disconnect from their wife, and this starts to, over a period of time, trigger the wife. She starts feeling the disconnection, and then as time goes on, he's not telling her anything. She's becoming more afraid of loss of security. And because he's not communicating, she thinks he's just not doing anything about it. And so she starts to react. And this begins a cycle of conflict. The second thing that could cause conflict is poor communication styles. And each one of us, whether you realize it or not, you already have a style of communicating. And if it's not healthy, you will need to work on it. Number three, our differences in parenting styles. If you have children, both parties grew up in different homes and have their ideas of how they think a child should be raised. And sometimes this can cause conflict. Then extended family member interferences from mothers-in-laws, fathers-in-law, brothers and sisters. And then another cause of conflict will be household responsibilities. Who does what? Who is responsible for what, and how well are they doing it? The sixth one, and I don't say it's six because it's not important, it's very important, is sex and intimacy. Frequency, satisfaction, and emotional connection can affect and cause conflict. This can cause conflict. And then we have personality and temperament differences, the kind of conflicts that will occur between introverts and extroverts. Now, having looked at those some reasons or some triggers of conflict, I just want to quickly go over some of the negative effects of conflict. I need to say that conflict is not something you should allow to linger in your marriage. Because you see, what cancer is to the human body is what conflict is to a marriage. If left unresolved, it gradually snuffs out the life of a marriage. So let's look at some negative effects of conflict. The first thing that conflict does is that it causes us to dwell and magnify the faults and the weaknesses of our spouse. Now, when this happens, we begin to form negative opinions about our spouse. And over time, these negative opinions or perceptions begin to affect the way we relate to our spouse, making us more likely to misinterpret their words and actions going on. And listen, and sometimes their actions and their words may not be coming from a place of selfishness or stubbornness or whatever interpretation we gave. Is just because we formed an opinion. So like I said, if we did form an opinion about our spouse that they are self-centered, they're selfish, or they are stubborn, I mean, if we feel, for example, they are selfish, certain things we used to do freely for our spouse, we stop doing. Certain things we would agree to, just because we feel they're selfish or self-centered, any request they make, the tendency or our first reaction afterwards will be to say no. Or if we feel they're stubborn, even the way we speak to our spouse, our tone of voice can become more aggressive. Now, the root cause of this is unresolved conflict. We formed an opinion. Conflict caused us to magnify that weakness in our spouse. And as a result of that, because we've not spoken or resolved that conflict, it changes our attitude towards our spouse. The second negative effect of conflict is that it destroys intimacy. Now, when conflict is allowed to fester in a marriage, it erodes three of the key elements of intimacy, which are understanding, trust, and openness. Now, the more a couple disagree and leave their conflict unresolved, the less they understand each other. The less they trust each other. And the less they trust each other, the less open they become. Now, to achieve intimacy, you have to grow in understanding, which leads to a growth in trust, which leads to a growth in openness. And intimacy requires us to be able to reveal ourselves to one another and be vulnerable. So once conflict comes in, understanding is blocked or reduced, and as a result, trust is diminished, whether it's emotional trust, whether it's trust on a moral ground, or whatever, trust is reduced. And once trust starts to go out of the window, openness shuts down. The third negative impact of conflict is that it gives birth to more conflict. Now, when conflict is ignored or swept under the carpet, it doesn't go away. Rather, it grows and reproduces bigger and more toxic conflicts later on. And lastly, I need to say that conflicts does open the door for Satan to destroy our marriages through our words and action. And that's simply the fact that usually when we're upset when we're offended, when we're angry, we are more susceptible to negative suggestions from the devil. Things that we ordinarily will not do, thoughts that will hurt our spouse, will start becoming more appealing to us. And if we're not careful and start to dwell on it, we'll start carrying it out. And this will just cause the marriage to degenerate. Because the deception is that we start to think that our spouse should know that they hurt us. And our spouse should know why we are retaliating. Meanwhile, the spouse feels the same way, that you are the person in the wrong. So by the time you act out those thoughts, you kind of add fuel to fire. And instead of the apology you may be expecting, you get an insult back in return, which just promotes and elongates the conflict. Now, having looked at these negative effects, I want us to touch on 4 unhealthy approaches couples use to engage conflict. And if you are doing any of these 4, you need to work on it and change. I'll touch on them and then give suggestions of how you can handle things differently. Now, the 4 unhealthy approaches to conflict are avoidance, 1, 2, escalation, 3, blame shifting, and number 4, the famous silent treatment. Now, let's break it down. Now, let's look at avoidance. Now, avoidance generally happens when one or both partners pretend that a problem does not exist or simply refuse to address it. Now, instead of facing the issue, they push it aside. They change the subject, sweep it under the carpet, hoping it will disappear on its own. Now, let me give you a few statements of avoidance. Let's move on. That's avoidance. I'm over it. Let's forget about it. No big deal. Now, it then ends up that what you are saying is no big deal becomes a very big deal when the unresolved issue causes major problems later on in the marriage. Now, while avoidance may bring temporary peace, the underlying issue continues to grow and often resurfaces later in a more damaging way. Now, avoidance in marriage breeds tension. It starts to cause emotional distance and can make small issues pile up until they explode. Now, instead of pretending the issue is not there, couples should agree to face it calmly and respectfully. This means setting aside time to talk and using what I call I feel statements instead of you always statements. What do I mean? Now, an I feel statement is like I feel hurt when you say this or when you do that. Now, when you do that, when you use I feel statements, you are not attacking your spouse. You are not accusing them of anything, and it prevents your spouse from getting defensive or feeling offended. You are simply stating how the situation makes you feel, which really is what you are trying to say anyway. Now, however, the other statement, which is the you always statement, is accusatory, and it generalizes, and it makes your spouse defensive. Like you always do this. You are always doing that. Then your spouse responds, it's not all the time. Yeah, it's not like that. And instead of addressing the issue, you guys start fighting over the you always statement. As such, healthy conflict resolution requires courage. Because engaging your spouse to say, let's talk about it, believe me, requires courage. And it also requires openness to talk about the issues at hand, and listen, with kindness, which means your words, gentleness and patience, rather than hurling accusations or being in denial about the situation. Now, the second wrong or unhealthy approach to conflict is what I describe as escalation. Now, some of us use that approach in conflict. Now, escalation occurs when, instead of calming a conflict, individuals respond in ways that make the situation more intense, more hostile, or more damaging. Now, usually people who use this approach, instead of addressing the specific issues calmly, their emotions spiral out of control, voices become raised, hurtful words are spoken, and past mistakes may be dragged in to inflict maximum pain. Now, escalation destroys trust, especially emotional trust, and respect between you and your spouse. It shifts the focus away from solving the problem to winning the argument, or proving that you are right and your spouse is wrong. Now, what could have been a simple misunderstanding now becomes a major battle, leaving both parties wounded and creating an atmosphere of resentment. Now, let me give you examples of escalations in conflict. One, when we shout or raise our voices when engaging in conflict. Once you start to raise your voice, you are escalating. When you start using insults, or when you start to blame your spouse, when you start to use sarcasm to attack your spouse, or you begin to criticize your spouse, you are escalating the conflict. When we bring up past mistake or dig up old wounds instead of addressing the current issue. Another way we escalate is when we constantly interrupt our spouse while they are talking instead of listening. And I see that quite often. Many people have this approach. They do not wait for their spouse to finish talking. They just start to interrupt. You are lying. That's not true. You are this. And once you start doing that, you start hearing the other person say, let me finish. You see, you're already escalating. Tensions begin to rise when you start to interrupt. And the last one is when we retaliate instead of addressing the problem. Maybe your spouse said, you are not thinking when you said that. And you said, me, I'm not thinking. You are an idiot for saying that. Now, that is retaliating. Now, once you move into escalation mode, you trigger the fight or the flight response, which means that depending on the temperament of both of you, somebody is going to shut down, or somebody is going to go nuclear. The person's temper is going to flare, and the person is going to get more aggressive. Now, the extroverted ones tend to become more aggressive. The introverted ones shut down because they start getting overwhelmed. And if you push further and you keep at it, they will leave that shutting down and meet you at your own level. And then the neighbors start to hear. Now, when most of us are upset, we stop thinking rationally. And we start reacting emotionally and impulsively by shouting, insulting, and attacking our spouse. This starts to cause miscommunication, emotional damage, and broken relationship. Now, so what do? Instead of escalating, practice de-escalation techniques. One of them is count to 20. And if your anger is very potent, count to 40. The point is that by the time you finish counting, your brain will have calmed down a bit. Now, if that's not working, breathe in and breathe out. As slowly, not fast. Breathe in and breathe out, right? Then also, make yourself learn to listen actively in order to understand your spouse's perspective. 3, learn to speak respectfully without raising your voice. Listen, just remind yourself, speak respectfully. Just say it back and forth to yourself and don't raise your voice. Just remind yourself, right? Because once you start raising your voice, whatever you say afterwards is not going to be heard. So why bother talking? If you want to be heard, you must learn to speak respectfully, and you must learn to use a gentle tone. Now, what you can do is slow down your speech. If you can slow down how you are talking, it can bring down the tone of your voice. Then, when you are addressing a conflict, focus on the issue. Stop attacking your spouse. Separate your spouse, person, and character from the issue. And then seek solutions and not looking for who to blame. The important thing is that the problem should be solved. So that's escalation. The third unhealthy way of addressing conflict is blame shifting. Blame shifting. Now, blame shifting is when we or our spouse refuse to take responsibility for our part in a problem and instead point fingers at the other person. Instead of working towards a solution, the couples get stuck in a cycle of accusation and defense. Some examples of blame shifting are, I wouldn't have gotten angry and shouted at you if you didn't provoke me. Another one is, the reason I spent all the money is that you are too stingy. Or, if you had not opened the door suddenly, I would not have broken the vase. Now, while it may feel like self-protection in the moment, blame shifting creates defensiveness and prevents the real issue from being resolved. Now, over time, it starts to damage trust because one partner starts to feel unfairly accused while the other avoids accountability. It turns conflict into a competition of who is right, instead of the two of you working together towards a solution. In marriage, blame shifting erodes unity and leaves both partners feeling misunderstood and unsupported. The solution to blame shifting is simple. Learn to take personal responsibility by acknowledging your contribution to the problem, no matter how small. Listen, even if your spouse is upset because of something you said during the conflict, acknowledge it. Take responsibility. Say, look, I shouldn't have said that to you. I'm sorry. Learn to take responsibility. Now, the truth is the fact that in almost every conflict, both parties are wrong. What I mean is that both parties will share some wrong or the other. It takes two to fight. So instead of apportioning blame, we can start learning to say things like, I was wrong here, and then work towards a resolution. And the last unhealthy approach is silent treatment, which is withdrawing instead of addressing the matter. Now, silent treatment is a form of emotional withdrawal when one party refuses to talk, refuses to engage, or even acknowledge the other person. While it may also feel like self-protection, it actually communicates to your spouse rejection and will create deep emotional pain in them. Now, it can make your spouse start to feel invisible, unloved, and unwanted. And over time, silent treatment erodes trust and intimacy. Now, so instead of shutting down, couples should practice, once again, respectful communication. Take time to cool off if needed, but always return back to the conversation. That's why I said conflict resolution requires courage. Come back to the communication. And don't forget that if you stay away, that thing is not going anywhere. It's going to cause more problems for the two of you in the future. So get back to that conversation. Now, one thing you need to know is that things that are worthwhile in life are not easy. Things that are going to make your marriage work are not convenient, but you do them anyway. It's like somebody who wants to succeed in business and doesn't like marketing. You make yourself market because you know that your survival, the survival of your business depends on it. Same thing with marriage. If you don't want to resolve conflict, then you have signed up to destroy your marriage. And so you need to make yourself do what is required to get your marriage back on track and moving in the right direction. So, like I said, instead of shutting down, couples should agree to express their feelings respectfully when they are upset. Now, this begins with acknowledging, for those who do silent treatment, it begins by acknowledging your emotions rather than burying them. Now, this is because people who usually dish out silent treatment don't like to confront or are afraid to confront lest they explode. Listen, just acknowledge your feelings first of all. You can say, for example, I'm really hurt right now and I need some time to cool off, but I want us to talk about this later. Just give me some time, I'll get back to you. And please make sure you go back. Now, this lets your partner know that the issue matters and will be addressed instead of leaving them feeling ignored or rejected. Breaking the silent treatment also requires creating a safe environment where both parties feel comfortable sharing how they feel without judgment or attack. Now, people who usually shut down, it's because of the judgment or attack that they are reluctant. So we need to learn to listen attentively and validate each other's feelings and avoid criticism or contempt during the conversation. And lastly, contempt. Now, some people, your approach to conflict, if it is contempt, is bad. Because people who use this approach ridicule their spouse. They speak disrespectfully. They say things that belittle their spouse and makes their spouse feel small. So it leaves the partner or your spouse feeling unloved. Let me use the word, making them feel irrelevant in the marriage and unwanted. So the solution to contempt is, listen, intentionally practice appreciation. If that is your approach and it just bubbles out of you, start focusing on the good things about your spouse and start to appreciate them. Start to speak respectfully to them, start to commend them, because people who use contempt criticize a lot. I mean, example are people are talking, you are talking, or you call yourself a woman, or you call yourself a man. That's contempt. That's ridicule. I beg, shut up, or rolling your eyes. No, don't do that. That's approaching conflict with contempt, and you are dishing out deep wounds that sometimes it might be difficult for your spouse to get over them. And because of that, they'll shut their hearts towards you and you start complaining that they don't open up towards you again. Now, let's just go through some guidelines for resolving conflict. And then we talk about communication and some communication styles and bring this teaching to an end. Now, here are some guidelines, and they're very important. And I don't even know whether I should call them guidelines or rules. Yeah, I think rules is more punchy, because if you violate it, you will end up fighting with your spouse if you don't do these things. Now, the first one that I would say is the most important is when you engage in conflict resolution, the first rule is seek to first understand your spouse's point of view. before trying to get your spouse to understand your own. Let me say it again. Seek to understand your spouse's point of view before trying to get your spouse to understand yours. Now, somebody should be asking right now, why? So, I'm going to answer your why from two perspectives. First, from the effect that initiative of trying to understand your spouse will have on your spouse, and the effect it will have on you, and the positive effect it will have on you. So let's look at the effect on your spouse when you first try to understand what they were trying to say or what their actions were intended for. The first thing it does is that it makes your spouse feel valued and respected when you choose to listen to their side. Listen, it communicates to your spouse that their thoughts and their feelings matter to you. Now, this will lower their defensiveness and increase their willingness to open up to you and to listen to you when the time comes. Now, so if you want to be understood, you need to understand first so that those walls can come down and your spouse is more willing to understand your perspective. If you don't do that and you want your spouse to first understand you, those defensive walls just go further up. And there's nothing you are going to say that they're going to listen to. Number two, talking about the positive impact of seeking to understand your spouse first, it reduces emotional tension. When someone feels heard, the stress hormones like cortisol decrease. Their brain shifts from fight or flight mode to what I call calm, open, and connect mode, which means it calms them down. They become more open and they're willing to connect with you. The third positive effect is that it boosts emotional safety between the two of you. It creates a safe environment where your spouse knows that they will not be judged or dismissed every time they want to express or both of you want to talk and resolve issues. And it makes them willing to come to the conflict resolution table. It strengthens trust and encourages vulnerability. And the fourth positive thing about when you seek to understand your spouse is that it validates their identity. Listening to understand reassures your spouse that their identity and needs are important to you. Now, the cause of a lot of conflicts in marriage go much deeper than the surface agreement or the surface disagreement. They often touch on deeper issues of identity and worth. So it's often a question of whether your spouse feels truly valued or respected or cared for. To be honest with you, if your spouse does not feel valued or cared for, they're not going to listen to you. I'm telling you. And it's going to make you feel frustrated and you'll be thinking the problem is your spouse. But it's just because of a failure on your part to listen to your spouse or make them feel heard and understood. Now, those are not all the benefits. It also has a positive effect on you as well when you choose to seek to understand your spouse. The first thing it does is that it makes you as well less defensive. When we choose to listen instead of rushing to defend ourselves, it settles our thoughts and reduces the chances of conflict escalating. Number two, it shifts our mindset from competition mode to cooperation mode. You begin to see the conflict as us versus the problem instead of me versus you. Just deciding to try to understand your spouse's point of view. The third thing it does is that it helps you develop empathy to start learning to see things from the other person's perspective. You train your brain to look at issues from another angle instead of only your own, which improves your emotional intelligence. And lastly, it strengthens your self-control. Now, by pausing to listen, you resist the impulsive reactions and build maturity in how you handle conflict. Yeah, so that's the first rule. It's the longest because it's the most important. I needed to stress the advantages. Now, other things that you need to do or not do, one of them is, like we said, avoid interrupting your spouse when they are talking. Don't expect what your spouse is going to say. This is just my comment about interrupting. Don't expect that what they are going to say will agree with your position. Because the reason why you are having a conflict is that you're not on the same page. So don't interrupt. Listen to discover where your differences are. And in fact, what I'll say is that listen until they finish and listen to understand. And when your spouse has finished, let me advise, repeat what you understood back to your spouse to just confirm you heard them and you understand what they're saying. And apart from that, after you have repeated it, validate your spouse's point. Now that leads us, of course, to the third thing, which is validation. Always validate your spouse's point of view. Recognizing that just because you do not agree with it does not make it less important than your own. The fact that it is even important to your spouse makes it important. Let me be honest. There's no way you're going to resolve a conflict feeling your own position is more superior. No way. You have to, listen, both parties feel theirs is more important. So who's going to win? So listen, both of you have your points. Acknowledge it. At least calm down. It's not about winning the argument. It's about understanding. Your spouse's point may have merit. Take time to even understand the merit before shooting it down and wanting to superimpose yours on it. Then the fourth thing you should do is focus on issues, not the person. Address the problem instead of attacking your spouse. Then the next one, which is the fifth one, is choose the right time and place. Avoid sensitive matters when you are angry, when you are tired, or when you are stressed out. And avoid trying to resolve them in public places before the two of you fight in public. Listen, go into your bedroom or somewhere where people are not, and it's just the two of you. Make sure you are calm. Make sure you are better. If you need to pray about the matter before you go ahead. Then practice humility and forgiveness, which simply means you could be wrong. Accept you could be wrong, or accept you are wrong, and be willing to forgive the area where your spouse may have hurt you. I'm going to move a bit faster. Then you need to seek compromise and teamwork. Here's what I would say. Sometimes you have to compromise by yielding. Sometimes you should negotiate, but you can't always have your way. You understand? Sometimes combining the two to get both your ideas gives you the best idea. So it's not about, you are not God. You don't know everything. The reason God gave you your spouse is because there's some parts of you that are lacking. And your spouse has stuff that can complement and make you a better person. So listen, you could be wrong. Or your fantastic strategy has flaws. So listen. Sometimes yield. In fact, there are times when you may think you are right, but until you learn to yield, your spouse may never see your point. All right? And then control your emotions, your tone of voice when you are in a conflict. Keep it calm. Keep it respectful. Keep it pleasant. And lastly, invite God into your conflict. Listen, if the fight is bad and the two of you are not talking, pray about the situation. Ask God to give you his perspective and wisdom before you engage your spouse. And if the two of you, if you can actually ask your spouse, can we pray before we start to talk? If your spouse agree, pray. And ask God to help the two of you see one another's point of view and be able to understand. And after your conflict, remember to give thanks. All right. We have a few minutes more, and I will start to just touch on communication and its impact on conflict. So listen, communication and conflict in marriage are deeply connected because the way couples communicate with each other often determines whether conflicts will weaken or strengthen their relationship. Hear me. Your marriage is 85% communication, which simply implies that when communication is positive and effective, it will produce 85% of the intimacy you enjoy in that marriage. And if it is negative and ineffective, it will produce 85% of the conflicts you will have. Things like money that I mentioned, sex, all those things, the reason they cause conflict is the poor communication style. That's the reason. The poor communication style. So 85% of the conflicts a couple will have will be because of their communication styles. Now, when the communication in marriage is positive and effective, it builds intimacy, it nourishes the relationship. But when it is negative, God help the couple, it destroys intimacy. Or when it is non-existent, they are not talking to each other, it snuffs out the life of that couple. I mean, there can't be any kind of intimacy without the couple talking to each other. So we must learn to build our marriages by speaking words that strengthen it, by speaking words that give life to our marriage, by speaking words that heals our spouse and strengthens them and edifies them. Words, the Bible says the power of life and death are in the tongue, and they that love it will eat the fruit thereof. That is, if you love to talk. I just hope the loving to talk is to speak positive words. But if it is negative, you reap a very bad harvest of your words. So let us learn to build our marriages using positive words. I'm just going to zero in I'm trying to determine there's something. Okay, let me just quickly talk on the three vehicles of communication, and to let us know that we're always communicating. Now, you're all watching me, and you can see my body movements. You can hear the tone of my voice, and you can hear the words I'm speaking. Now, you will notice that my body language, you might not realize it, is speaking loudest. I mean, I could talk to you like this and say, my body language is speaking to you loudest. Now, when I do that, it kind of just shuts down the import of whatever I'm saying. And so the three ways that, or the three vehicles by which we communicate are: one, our words; two, the tone of our voice; and three, what we call non-verbal expressions. which will be our body language and the things we do. So, even when you are quiet, you're communicating. Your being quiet is what we call non-verbal expressions, and they are saying something. Now, the interesting thing is the fact that the message, if we look at these three vehicles and look at which one has the greatest impact, funny enough, most of us think our words should have the greatest impact. But the impact of your words is usually about 5%, or 7%. Now, the impact of the tone of your voice on your spouse is 38%, which means that your spouse hears the tone of your voice 38% louder than your words. Then your non-verbal expressions, which are your body language or the things you do, listen, they carry 55%, which means that people hear your body language 55% louder than your words and your tone of voice. That's where the statement, action speaks louder than words, comes from. Now, so we need to bear that in mind. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But when you're communicating, because you don't see your body language, you don't see your facial expressions, it just means you're not the best judge of the message you may be passing across. As such, that's why they say communication is not effective until you get feedback, or until your spouse understands what you feel and what you are trying to say. Now, you'll be surprised your tone of voice can distort what you're trying to say. Your body language can distort it. And just in case, even the perception of your spouse about you can distort whether your message gets across or not. So never think that just because you spoke, you are understood. Always seek to get feedback. And listen, when you ask for feedback, be respectful in the way you do it. Don't say, do you understand? Talk to me. Talk. Be gentle, be nice, be respectful, and ask for feedback. You just might be surprised that what you thought you said is not what your spouse heard. So, we would round up by looking at 4 communication styles. And if my time expires, at least I'll let you know what they are. And we may have to stop where the time ends. Now, there are 4 communication styles, and most of us will fall into one or more of these categories, or we may use 2, or we may use 3. Now, the funny thing is that 3 of them are not good. Only 1 is healthy. Now, the first communication style is what we call the passive communication style. The second is the aggressive communication style. The third is the passive aggressive communication style. And the fourth one is the assertive communication style, which should be the goal of everyone. Each one of us should work towards the assertive communication style. So just to give us some understanding of what each style is about, the first one, which is the passive communication style, someone who is a passive communicator avoids expressing their feelings or their needs out of the fear of conflict or rejection. They don't talk. They just keep quiet. They lack the confidence and often bottle up things by agreeing outwardly, while inwardly they don't agree and feel frustrated. Now, this style leads to unresolved issues because problems are pushed aside instead of addressing them. Over time, the passive spouse starts to build resentment, starts to feel cheated, while the other person starts getting confused, in the sense that their spouse seems to have shut down, is resentful, and they don't know why. Or they may feel confused or unsupported, and they just get confused. Now, it could also lead to a decline in emotional and even physical intimacy. So what should you do if this is your style? Practice self-expression by learning to express how you really feel in non-volatile and sensitive and non-sensitive atmospheres using I feel statements. For example, I feel you don't listen to me. When both of you are calm and, just say it. I feel you don't listen to me. Or the other day when you said this, it made me feel this way. Then build your confidence level by reminding yourself that your voice matters in the marriage. Then, listen, start learning to set boundaries by learning to say no respectfully. Now, saying no respectfully is not about saying no respectfully. It's about the tone of voice you use, okay? Then start small by learning to share your opinions on everyday matter, the weather, Lagos traffic, the price of products. Start learning to express yourself, and gradually your confidence level starts to build. Number 2, the aggressive communication style. An aggressive communicator speaks in a forceful, dominating, and disrespectful way. They often blame, criticize, or raise their voice, making their spouse feel attacked or belittled. This usually will create fear and defensiveness rather than closeness. Now, what do you do to improve? Practice speaking gently, or practice gentleness by consciously lowering the tone and volume of your voice. Listen, when we talk, we want to be heard. If you want to be heard and understood, learn to be gentle, especially with the tone of your voice. Bring it down. Then pause before responding. When you are angry, like I said earlier, take a deep breath or count to 20 before speaking. Also, switch from blaming and attacking your spouse to start using the I feel statement. Instead of saying, you never help me, you this lazy person, say, I feel overwhelmed when the chores pile up. Then learn to develop empathy by asking yourself, how will my words make my spouse feel? Or how will I feel if someone said what I said or I'm about to say to me? Practice empathy. The third one is what we call the passive-aggressive communication style. Now, a passive-aggressive communicator avoids direct confrontation, but expresses their anger and frustration indirectly through sarcasm, procrastination, silent treatment, veiled criticism, or what we call a veiled insult. Now, let me just give you an example of sarcasm from someone with a passive-aggressive communication style. When they feel unappreciated, they can say, oh, don't worry about me. I only live here as your houseboy or your housegirl. That's what they will say. Now, just know that they are telling you something, they're not happy. Or when they feel controlled, they can say, yes, boss, whatever you say, your wish is my command. Now, the way they say it, they don't mean it. Now, that is just an example of what a passive aggressor, someone with a passive-aggressive communication style will do. They will not directly insult you, but they will insult you in an indirect way. That after they finish with you, you will not even know whether they insulted you or whether they, you know that this thing was not coming from a good place. And lastly, what we should all aim for is the assertive communication style. Now, the assertive communicator expresses their needs, their feelings, and opinions clearly and respectfully, while willing to listen and understand their spouse's perspective or point of view. This is the healthiest style for marriage because it promotes understanding, reduces defensiveness, and focuses on solving problems instead of winning arguments. It builds intimacy and trust and teamwork and allows both partners to feel valued, understood, and respected. This is the kind of communication style we should all strive for to develop in our relationship. Well, I would have to stop here, and we will now go to the question and answer session.